Sure. So we landed in Camp Leatherneck. I landed in Camp Leatherneck with a boatload of Marines, or an airplane full of Marines. It was September 13th, 2010. I remember whenever the hatch on the back of the plane went down, and it was cool in that plane. Just we had just been up in the air, but when that hatch went down, it was 113 degrees outside, and that hot air and dust blasted into the aircraft, and we were at Camp Leatherneck on that tarmac, and I stepped boots on the ground there, and that's really, sir, that's when I really lost my breath, and I said, "Holy moly, what did I get myself into?" So it wasn't long though before we left Camp Leatherneck, and most of our company was kicked out to Delaram at that time, which was on the western side of the country, the southwestern side of the country, not too far away from the Iranian border. And it was once we got to Delaram that my platoon was then split up a little bit. So I had my squad. I was under Sergeant Clifford at the time. There were 12 of us. We were given 4 vehicles, and we were told we were going to serve as the Quick Reaction Force for Regimental Combat Team 2 at that time. And, my thoughts on a QRF, of course, at the time were, well, anytime things hit the fan and they need a quick force to get moving, it was going to be us. But our mission evolved a little bit in that we did all sorts of great things. It wasn't just to go out anytime backup was requested, but it was also to conduct presence patrols, to do route clearance. We escorted VIPs to and from different bases all over Southwest Afghanistan, even an ambassador at one point too. So I got to, in that capacity, travel almost 20,000 miles.
Wow.
To all sorts of different places in Afghanistan. I saw Sangin, I saw Musa Kela, Marja, Delaram, Guri Guri, Gavmishi, Goresk, Kajaki. I mean, you name it. At one time, we were even very close to Bamiyan. I think we were maybe 40 or 50 clicks away from the Buddha statues of Bamiyan. And me being an historian, that's what my academic credentials are in. I was salivating at the mouth and thinking, oh my gosh, we might get an opportunity to see those statues on the side of that mountain. So it was really neat. And that was a blessing in disguise, because I was a little bit concerned. I heard QRF and I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to get thrown to the wolves here. But it was a blessing in that I got to see, a giant chunk of that country.
So to paint the picture a little bit about what JD is talking about is, once the battalion landed at Camp Leatherneck, each company of Marines went in different directions. So Kilo, we went to Delaram, another company stayed in Leatherneck, and another company went to, and I can't remember what that camp was. It was a different, but Delaram was Dwyer. That's it. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
And Dwyer was in, but Delaram was relatively, I thought, okay, we can do this easily for 6.5 months. It was relatively quiet, not a lot going on. But then once we heard word that 3-5 was having trouble, each night we would go to these meetings with the RCT commander, and we kept hearing of the casualties of 3-5 and what they're experiencing. And of course, we were new there, and 3-5 was new there. And so I went to Colonel Kennedy as a young major and said, "Sir, we're an infantry company sitting here in Delaram. We can go to Sangin and help these guys right away, put us in the fight. We're infantry trained, and we can go do that." And at that moment, that's when, I think a week went by and he was thinking about it because of what happened with 325 in 2005. And that still hung in the air about reserves. And for the listeners out there, what happened to 325 in 2005 in Iraq is they had a lot of casualties. And often what happens with the reserves are lots of friends from different schools will join together, or in small towns will all join together. So they had so many casualties, it was described to me that the casualty call would go down the street. And of course, they had one catastrophic kill where the vehicle blew up and was full of 325 Marines. And they were all from this little town, this neighborhood. And so the casualty call was just going down the street and then going down the street to notify the next one, and then going one block over and notifying the next one. And it was just, they wanted to avoid that happening again. And so they hesitated sending reserves in, let alone 325 again, in Sangan directly in there. But I thank Colonel Kennedy for that. He had faith and confidence in us and sent us in. But one thing, going back to ILOC, the training for this, what we trained for at ILOC was very different than what was actually experienced in Afghanistan. So, JD, paint the picture. We were training for Iraq, and when they said, so first of all, we were training in Humvees only, and then we get out and we do these V sweeps. So if you see a deck core, you see a line, or you think you see something, you get out and you form a V formation, walk along the vehicle, and then try and find a wire, which was usually command detonated, and then you go and follow the wire to see where it went. If you did that in Afghanistan, first of all, we didn't have Humvees in Afghanistan. And if you did that in Afghanistan, everyone would be blowing up because they had so many. It was not command detonated IEDs. It was the crush boxes. It was the pressure plate IEDs.
Pressure plate.
And they were everywhere. And so the last thing you want to do is get out and spread out all over the place in Afghanistan. So the tactics and training that we had in ILOC was entirely different than what we experienced in Afghanistan. So
Sure. I'm glad you noticed, sir, because it's something that those of us in the lower ranks were talking about after having gone and done it and came home. And you said, you had MOUT shoved down, crammed down your throat. Military operations, urban terrain for any civilians listening. It was a totally different scenario. Even in boot camp, when I went to boot camp in 2008, it was all surrounding Iraq. But my drill instructor, I'll never forget, the kill hat. He told a select few of us, he said, make no mistake about it. We're telling you all about Iraq right now, but you Marines are going to be the Marines that go in a troop surge to Afghanistan. And 2 years later, his prophecy to us was correct. And so I never believed that Afghanistan was going to be where we served. I always was expecting it to be Iraq. So that was another little shock that we had, I guess, whenever we were told we were being activated and where it was that we were going. But I'm grateful, sir, that we had, first, I think we had great leadership. So thank you for that, sir. And we had the benefit in our unit of having a lot of veterans from the 2005 deployment and a couple who had activated with other units in between that they came back and they imparted a lot of wisdom on us. And so 325, and I think especially Kilo 325 was set to take on any mission that the Marine Corps would throw at us. And that was evidenced by our effectiveness and our efficiency in a place like Sangan, which, at the time was one of the most, if not the most kinetic place in the country at the time. And I'm grateful for the training that we had.
So I've got to ask this real quick. What was some of the VIPs that, I hate to say forced to escort, but you were given the mission? Because I know when I had to assign that, it was like, crap, I really got to take this guy around, and I got to take Marines away from the primary mission. Who were some of the individuals that you were escorting?
So the one that sticks out in my mind, sir, was then ambassador to Afghanistan, Eikenberry was his name. He came into Delaram and he wanted to go on a tour of the local bazaar there. And so we got to serve on that detail. It was interesting. It was interesting to say the least. But most of the VIPs that we got to escort and take to and fro were general officers and field grade officers who were in command and leadership positions and making considerable decisions on the ground there. And so, it wasn't always a burden, and it didn't always seem like it was just for nothing, for a photo op or anything. And not to diminish Ambassador Eikenberry's visit, because I think it was important at sometimes, to see that there was that Hearts and Minds campaign that we talk about so often going on. But to be able to take those senior leaders from places like Delaram and Leatherneck, and literally we would drive them to a place like Sengen or Marja, and be responsible for getting them there safely. I felt privileged to be able to do that. I understood that these were individuals who were valuable for their leadership to the Marine Corps and to the effort. So that was again, it was a pleasure.
So I'll throw this question out: is that we could talk about Sangan all day long and what that was like, but once we got to the point where we were coming home and we'd been there and it was ugly for a while, and then the attacks started to taper down a little bit, because they knew it was because the Marines were doing such a good job in taking the fight to them. And once we got home, what was that effect? Because as reservists, for the listeners out there, what happens is that you're on orders for essentially 13 months. And then those orders is 400 days. And then at the end of 400 days, your orders just stop. And then your pay stops. And you get a couple of benefits and things like the medical and all that for a few months after that. But the point is, the Marine Corps says, that's it. We're done with you. Go back to your civilian jobs. Go back to what you were doing before. And your pay just stops on the 400th day. How was that? How did that impact you when all of a sudden a month before you're walking around and saying in Afghanistan, and now you're just okay, you're a civilian, literally pushed out the door?
Yeah. So my experience was maybe a little bit different from others. I had the privilege of traveling to Hawaii after we got home, because I said, you know what, I didn't have an opportunity for a year to spend any of this money that I worked hard to earn. And I knew that I was going to need a little bit of time to decompress, and what better way to do that than in paradise with a pina colada and white sand in your toes. And so I got to do that for a little while. But at the same time, I think that's what made it all the more strange. It wasn't that I came home and I went right back to work or back into school or anything. All of a sudden, I was on a pristine white sand beach with crystal clear blue water and palm trees swaying, and I have a cold drink in my hand. I was thinking, did this really just all transpire? Did that happen? Did I just live over there for the last year literally out of a vehicle? I'm sleeping, if I'm sleeping at all, sitting up in a Mat V, and it was hard to swallow. And then, of course, knowing what had happened to the Marines in units like 3-5 that we worked closely with, and 2-9 was there at the same time we were in country too, and getting to walk away from that, being in a place and spending the majority of our time in a place like Sangan, it was hard to swallow at times, and it was even harder to get along with folks once I did start going back to school and back to work. It was a little bit harder to get along with those folks. And not that I would fight with anybody, but sometimes I'd hear the conversations that were being had, and the moans and complaints.
Yeah, I bet that's
and just think, you have no idea what it means to be in a hard way, and that's okay. We take that on. We volunteer for that as Marine Corps infantrymen, right? Or as Marines in general. I mean, you understand, and I think the thing that I say the most to myself whenever I'm trying to justify this, I saw it written on a whiteboard somewhere in a headquarters while we were in country, but then I saw a picture of this somewhere else, and it said, "America is not at war. The Marine Corps is at war. America is at the mall."
That's a great saying. I remember seeing that.
That's good.
Yeah, and it kind of put it into perspective for me. It said, you know what, we're here, and of course, the folks that are back home, they might not have us on their minds right now, but that's okay, because that's part of what we're fighting for, right? Part of that American way of life, where it's that comfort, it's that luxury. I don't begrudge civilians back home for living a life where they don't have to think about the stuff that you and I had to do and see, because I don't want them to ever have to do and see that stuff. That's why we volunteered to do it.